As the season outlook for the Philadelphia 76ers continues to look bleaker and bleaker, more trade targets are beginning to pop in the conversation. Patrick Williams of the Chicago Bulls has now cracked the list of players potentially linked to the Sixers. I want to break down if that could be the missing piece to turn around this entire season. The Sixers have now dropped to 3-14 on the season following an overtime loss to the Houston Rockets. It is as bleak of an outlook as I could have ever imagined could have been the case for this year. But regardless, there are still 82 games to be played on the season. We know the expectations for this Sixers team heading into the year, and there's still a lot of season left. So if they are not to pack it up and call it a lost year, which I think we're at the point where that needs to be a real conversation, if that is the direction they want to go, Patrick Williams is the type of target I could see Daryl Morey getting involved in. So let's jump into the latest reports, talk a little bit about what exactly we're seeing. And I want to start with the initial report from Jake Fisher saying the Chicago Bulls are reportedly willing to discuss Patrick Williams' name in trade talks. And to add that a little farther, this a little bit more just from Fisher here that it says, having just agreed to a 5-year, $90 million extension in the past offseason, the Chicago Bulls are reportedly willing to discuss trade packages, including Patrick Williams. So, as that mentioned, he did sign an extension this offseason, has not been off to the season that was really hoped or expected here. 9.9 points per game, 5.0 rebounds, 2.3 assists, shooting just 37.6% from the field, 39.4% from beyond the arc there. Never want to see that 3-point number higher than from the full from the field numbers. But regardless, to dive in a little deeper, did want to reflect on the whole picture here. Now, as you can see, it has been a bit of an up and down career for Patrick Williams here. He is not a guy that I would consider my type of player, not a guy that I would say, like, this is a dude that is a game-changing talent. But what I do see is there is a potential fit on the Sixers team. Now, to talk a little bit about what he brings to the table in the positive side here, number one for me, it is his frame. This is a guy that is real deal tall. Real deal has the size, the frame, the athleticism to match up with teams there. So it's exciting stuff that what he could mean to this franchise here. When talking about this Sixers team as fully constructed, it is still tough to fully picture that we've seen a grand total of 6 minutes of Joel Embiid, Paul George, and Tyrese Maxey sharing the floor together. That is something that is going to have to change moving forward if they're going to have any chance of it. But when talking about what the Sixers have been missing in years past, a lot of people, myself included, have talked very much about this Aaron Gordon role. And what I mean by that is a player who is probably a higher caliber of talent than what his role on the team will be. Another clear example of this, I would say, is Andrew Wiggins when he kind of got reinitiated into that Warriors team, was capable of just being that guy can step up when is needed, but has a pretty clear-cut niche of a role. Aaron Gordon is a guy who wasn't good enough to be a number one option down in Orlando, was shipped to Denver, and obviously has made himself a pretty perfect fit playing next to Nikola Jokic there. That's kind of the model of what I would picture this type of Patrick Williams deal is. That is a guy that is a more true power forward, a guy that you would have to look in that starting lineup. And when kind of having the conversations about how do you get there, how do you make this trade happen, it does seem likely or pretty much certain to me it would involve either Kelly Oubre or Caleb Martin's contract there. I personally would push very heavily in the direction that Kelly Oubre should be the guy sent out if that is the conversation there. But I do think Patrick Williams is a guy that would improve the perimeter defense, bring a little bit more splash of size, athleticism. He's a little bit kind of closer to that 3-4 rather than a true traditional power forward. But this is something that I could see Daryl Morey making a splash at, giving this team a chance, and bringing just another key piece of the puzzle here. So to dive in a little deeper on what Patrick Williams brings to the table, do have a couple reports to break down. Shout out my guy Harrison Grimm from Liberty Ballers here, who quote tweeted the initial report saying, the Sixers are reportedly in the market for a power forward, and Patrick Williams would make sense as a potential target. He could help now, and he's only 23 years old. He's making $18 million a year flat for the next 5 years, a high number, but the Sixers could get there if they wanted. Now, a little bit more of a negative outlook here, but this from my guy Brian Toperic. So he writes, and this coming from before the season, as there was a little bit of buzz about Patrick Williams and the Sixers in the offseason. Ultimately, he did stay with the Bulls on a restricted contract offer, so not a lot of noise there. But the full write-up at the time from Brian is, full discourse. There's a chance that Patrick Williams is just Tobias Harris 2.0. On the bright side, he shouldn't cost anywhere close to a max contract. Like Harris, Williams is a frustratingly low-volume three-point shooter despite being an above-average marksman. He has drilled 40.9% of his 3.4 long-range attempts per game over the past 2 seasons, which begs the question of why isn't he firing away more often. The good news is Williams has been a plus defender in each of the past 2 seasons. At 6'7" and 215 pounds, with nearly a 7-foot wingspan, he's the exact type of physical toolkit that Nurse has maximized on both ends of the floor in the past. According to Casey Johnson of NBC Sports Chicago, the Bulls offered Williams an extension in the neighborhood of 4 years and $64 million with a team option, while he reportedly won in the vicinity of DeAndre Hunter's 4-year, $90 million deal with Atlanta. However, Johnson added that Williams might have come down to $20 million annually. If the Sixers strike out on their top wing options, Paul George, Brandon Ingram, etc., it might not hurt to throw an offer sheet at Williams and dare the Bulls to match. So obviously, we know how history played itself at that point out that we did get to see Paul George come to the Sixers. We have not seen the version of Paul George that we hoped on the floor just yet, but this wasn't a backup option. This would be something added to the Sixers team. I think there needs to be some real conversations behind the scenes. Are they still going for it this year? Do they believe they can crawl out of this hole that they've clearly put themselves in? And there are flashes of positivity with this team. Gershon Yabusele coming up off a 20-plus point performance, which he knocked down 4 threes. He's a guy that looks like a guy capable of being a high-level role player on a contending team. Jared McCain, he's had his ups and downs, a couple more cold shooting nights than we've been used to or have seen thus far, but he's still a guy that is playing far above what anyone could have expected at this time. Tyrese Maxey, we saw him being capable of leading the charge for a bit. I think that Rockets game was probably the most impressed with him I've been this season. I felt the confidence in him. I felt the way that he was making things happen all over the floor. But at the end of the day, a loss is still a loss. And while I was more impressed with the effort, while I think the actual output of basketball on the floor was far better than has been the case in a lot of string of games, it is still a loss in the win and loss column there. So the Sixers have to be pretty careful about what are our odds of climbing out of this. Now, I still think the Eastern Conference is so bad that they have a chance here. Like, we're still talking about just a handful of games out of making the playoffs with a ton of games left to be played on the season. But this is all an internal issue with the Sixers team. This is about getting Joel Embiid back on the floor. This is about Paul George playing more than a handful of games before re-injuring that knee once again. Those are the guys. And I do think that if you take one of those two at this point, and obviously we hope to have everybody at some point, but if you give me one of Joel Embiid and Paul George whilst getting the production of Tyrese Maxey, of Jared McCain, of Gershon Yabusele, this team's just going to win a little bit more games. It's going to be a little bit more watchable, and there's going to be a more positive outlook here. Bringing Patrick Williams into the mix here is something that I do think changes the Sixers ceiling a little bit more is the case. And now when you look at this Bulls team as a whole, there's a pretty strong track record of them not properly developing their young talent. I mean, we've seen guys go to other locations and shine. Lauri Markkanen, a clear example of it here. Wendell Carter down in Orlando that I would point to as well. I like Patrick Williams. I thought he would be better than has been the case coming out of college. This does strike me as an opportunity to potentially buy low and say this season is go to complete disaster if we are teetering on the blow-up version of the Sixers team. There is a world where we're talking about Patrick Williams as a part of that next Maxey and McCain backcourt. But I think that's kind of a storyline that we need to note a little bit more heavily here is when you talk about designing a team around Tyrese Maxey and Jared McCain, it looks pretty significantly different than designing a team around Joel Embiid, which is what this roster currently looks like. If you're going to roll with McCain and Maxey, who obviously are incredibly high caliber offensive talents, they're also pretty short of stature by NBA standards. So in order to make that work, you have to have these rangy, athletic, perimeter, defenders that pop off the page here. That's what you're getting with Patrick Williams there, who is just 23 years old. So if we're talking about that next generation, I do think there is a fit for that. So in my eyes, this is kind of a trade that could balance both things. You can accomplish both goals here of giving you a chance of contention in the short term and potentially being a long-term part of the Sixers team. We'll see how serious the Bulls fully are, that throughout really their history, they've been not the most willing trading teams. They seem more content than any organization I've seen sitting at directly mediocre, and that could ultimately prove to be the case once again this year, as that is where they find themselves. But it does feel like that team is open for business and frankly should be based on what we're seeing. The Zach LaVines, Kobe White, I do think is a keeper, and that would be my build-around piece if I was them. But everyone beyond that, Vucevic, every other piece that you think, we saw him trade Alex Caruso for a bag of chips this summer. I would love Daryl Morey to pick up the phone and at least make a call about this. This is something that I think there needs to be change within the Sixers. There needs to be something to ride with, to have a little bit of optimism about. And I do think adding a 23-year-old rangy athletic wing could be something that changes the vibes a little bit. Ultimately, nothing is going to be changed until Joel Embiid and Paul George get healthy. That the outlook is as bleak as it could be, more than I ever imagined could be the case entering the season, but who knows? You got to turn around somewhere. The season's progressing, so this is something I would keep my eye out moving forward. We'll see how serious the Bulls are. We'll see how serious the Sixers are in the coming games and weeks moving forward, that I do think we'll be able to tell in the fairly short term if this team is going to really try and scrap out of the hole that they've dug, or if we are talking more likely about the Cooper Flags and Ace Baileys and Igor Demons and everyone else in this draft class right here. So I'm ready for whatever. I need to see some wins. I'm encouraged by that loss to the Rockets overall, that it was the most watchable product I've seen from the Sixers in several weeks, and I thought a much better competitive spirit that we've seen in a lot of these matchups, but a loss is still a loss, and there is no room for moral victories in the NBA here. So we'll see if they can turn things around. We'll see if Patrick Williams is a part of the equation, but I'll be here breaking things down from start to finish right here on Sixers Digest. So I want as many of you as possible rocking with me and joining the Digest family. So if you have not already, make sure you're smashing that subscribe button, dropping a like on this video. I'll be back talking to you next time, hopefully a little bit better spirits about this Sixers team.